In the small, fog-kissed town of Tennessee River County, the mornings always smelled of pine, smoke, and bread. The people were simple folk, farmers, fishermen, and tradesmen who rose with the rooster and slept by the moon. Among them was Elias Boone, the town butcher. Elias's shop stood at the end of Main Street, a narrow wooden building with a squeaky sign that read Boone's Butchery and Provisions. Inside, it was spotless, knives lined like soldiers, counters scrubbed to shine. He was a large man with gray-streaked hair, a trimmed beard, and the quiet strength of someone who had seen too much and said too little. Most mornings, he worked before sunrise. Sometimes, people passing by swore they heard him murmuring, low, almost like prayer, before his cleaver hit the board. But no one dared ask what he said, because Elias Boone, though kind, carried a strange air about him, something between sorrow and fear. It began with a whisper at the tavern. A boy named Tommy Brewer, barely 13, came running into the bar one morning. "I seen it," he shouted, eyes wide. "I seen Mr. Boone talking to the meat like it was alive." The laughter came first, rough, drunken, harmless. But in a town where faith ran deep and superstition deeper, the laughter didn't last. By nightfall, the rumor spread across porches and prayer circles alike. The butcher says the meat speaks before he cuts it. Some said it was madness. Others said witchcraft. Only one man, Sheriff Clyde Mason, took it seriously. "Ain't natural," he muttered, puffing his pipe. "Men start talking to dead flesh. Something dark's bound to follow." 2 days later, Widow Hensley came by the butcher's shop. She was a gentle woman in her 60s, known for her faith and her patience. "Morning, Elias," she greeted softly. "I need a roast for Sunday." "The preacher's coming over." Elias nodded and reached for his knife. But as he lifted the blade, something in his face changed. His eyes went distant, the color draining from his cheeks. He froze, mid-motion. The widow frowned. "You all right, son?" Elias whispered, barely audible. It said, "Not yet." She blinked. "What did?" He looked down at the slab of meat, trembling slightly. The meat. It said, "Not yet." The widow, though startled, didn't mock him. She just placed a wrinkled hand over his. "Elias Boone," she said kindly, "you've carried grief too long. Maybe it's not voices you hear. Maybe it's your own soul trying to speak." But Elias only sighed and wrapped the meat anyway. "Maybe," he said, "but the soul shouldn't sound like this." That night, Elias sat by the river behind his shop, staring at the dark water. The moonlight rippled across it like silver veins. His mind wandered back 20 years, to the war. The Battle of Shiloh, where he served as a field butcher for wounded soldiers. He could still hear it, the screaming, the smell of iron and blood, the sound of young men begging to live. He had cut not meat then, but flesh, his brothers, his comrades. He learned to keep his hands steady, even when his heart broke. Sometimes, in his dreams, the dead called his name. Sometimes, he feared the voices in the meat were their echoes. He looked at the moon and whispered, "If this is punishment, Lord, I'll bear it. But let the voices mean something good. Curiosity burns hotter than fear." Tommy Brewer, still obsessed with the rumor, decided to prove it true. Before dawn, he slipped through the alley behind the butcher's shop and hid behind 2 barrels of salt. Elias entered soon after, humming a hymn under his breath. He laid a side of beef on the counter and sharpened his knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. Then he stopped. His shoulders stiffened. Tommy leaned closer. The old man's lips moved soundlessly at first. Then came the whisper, "I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry I couldn't stop it." Tommy gasped, and the sound made Elias whirl around, knife in hand. When he saw the boy, he just sighed and set it down. "You shouldn't be here," Elias said. I heard you," Tommy stammered. "You were talking to it." Elias nodded sadly. "I was listening." Tommy bolted out the door, running straight home, shouting all the way, "The butcher talks to dead animals." That evening, a heavy fist struck Elias's door. Sheriff Clyde Mason stood outside, tall, broad, and skeptical as always. "Evening, Boone." "Mind if I step in?" Elias motioned him inside. The sheriff looked around the spotless shop, knives gleaming, counters clean, no blood in sight. "You've been the talk of the town," he said. "Folks saying you hear voices." "That true?" Elias rubbed his temples. "They're not voices like you think, Clyde. It's more like a feeling. Sometimes words from the meat, from what the meat used to be," Elias said quietly. "It's like the soul didn't quite leave." The sheriff frowned uneasy. "Elias, people round here don't take kindly to talk like that." "They'll call it devil's work." Elias met his gaze. "Then let them. I'd rather be cursed for compassion than praised for cruelty." The sheriff studied him for a moment, then said gruffly, "Just don't cause trouble, old friend," and left. 3 nights later, a farmer brought in a deer he'd hunted near the hills. Elias accepted it reluctantly. The deer's eyes were still glassy, as if mid-thought. He placed his hand on its flank and closed his eyes. Then he heard it, clear as day, a voice like wind through hollow wood. "Stop him. Tomorrow." The bridge Elias staggered backward, clutching his chest. Who? What bridge? But the voice faded, leaving only silence and the low hum of the lanterns. By morning, Elias had made his decision. He walked straight to the sheriff's office and said, "Something's going to happen at the bridge tomorrow. You need to stop it." Mason looked up from his paperwork, unimpressed. "The only thing crossing that bridge tomorrow is the church wagon, taking kids to Sunday school." Elias's voice broke. "Then that's it. Something's wrong with that bridge." The sheriff sighed. "You've gone mad, Boone. Go home." But Elias didn't. He waited. The next morning, the church wagon creaked down the dirt road, filled with children laughing and singing hymns. Elias stood by the side of the bridge, heart pounding. "Lord, don't let me be crazy," he whispered. Then came the sound, cracking wood. The bridge groaned, shifted, then collapsed. The horses screamed, the wagon plunged. Without hesitation, Elias ran into the cold, churning water. He cut the harness ropes with his knife, freeing the horses. Then he pulled one child, then another, to safety on the muddy bank. When Sheriff Mason arrived minutes later, drenched and stunned, he could only stare. You knew," he said. Elias looked at him, water streaming from his beard. "The deer told me," he said simply. After that day, no one laughed at Elias Boone again. The papers called him the Prophet Butcher. The preacher called him cursed. Some townsfolk brought him bread in thanks. Others crossed the street to avoid him. Sheriff Mason, torn between duty and friendship, warned him gently, "You're treading a fine line, Elias." "Folks fear what they can't explain," Elias nodded. "Fear's a heavy thing. But it's lighter than guilt that Sunday." Preacher Dobbs thundered from the pulpit, "Beware false prophets. The devil too can whisper truth if it brings you to ruin." Half the congregation looked at Elias. He never went back to church again. A week later, as autumn leaves turned gold, a letter arrived from Clara Boone, Elias's daughter. "Pa, I've heard the rumors from home. They say you talk to beasts and hear the dead. I don't believe half of what I hear, but it hurts me that you live alone in whispers and fear. Please, come to Nashville. Whatever you've done, whatever they say, I just want my father back." Elias held the letter in shaking hands. Clara had left years ago, angry at his drinking, at his silence, at the way the war had hollowed him out, but her words cracked the dam in his chest. He sat in the dark, eyes wet, and whispered to the empty shop, maybe the only voice I should have listened to all along was hers. That night, though, as he prepared to close the shop, the whispers returned, faint, mournful, and restless. He looked toward the hanging cuts of meat and asked, "What do you want from me?" And from somewhere deep and unseen, the answer came, "To be heard." The next morning, a farmer named Jed Matthews came into Elias Boone's shop, dragging a large hog behind his cart. "Caught him myself," Jed said proudly. "Figure you can make good sausage off this one." Elias nodded, but as soon as his hand brushed the animal's coarse hide, something rippled through him, a pulse of dread. He froze. The sound came again, soft but urgent, echoing inside his head. Fire. The mill. Tonight. His grip tightened. "The mill?" he whispered. Jed frowned. "You say something, Boone?" Elias shook his head quickly. "No, nothing." As soon as Jed left, Elias ran down Main Street to the old grist mill by the river, where men were working late. He shouted, "You all need to clear out. Now." They laughed at first, but something in his eyes, wild, pleading, made them hesitate. Moments later, sparks from the grinding stone caught the flour dust in the air. The whole place burst into flame like a flash of hellfire. Elias and the workers barely escaped alive. No one died that night, and though the sheriff didn't say it, everyone knew. Elias Boone had saved them. But hero or not, strange things breed fear. The preacher's words had taken root in bitter hearts. That night, a group of men, half drunk, half afraid, gathered outside the butcher's shop with torches. At their front stood Reverend Dobbs, Bible in one hand, kerosene in the other. "This man speaks with spirits," he shouted. "He listens to demons in dead flesh. He's no savior. He's cursed." The crowd roared agreement. Inside, Elias sat alone at his counter, sharpening his knife slowly, not in threat, but in thought. When he opened the door, the glow of flames painted his face. "If I could silence the voices, I would," Elias said softly. "They speak so I might save, not harm." Someone hurled a stone. Glass shattered. Before the mob could move again, Widow Hensley appeared from the darkness, shawl whipping in the wind. She stood in front of Elias, arms wide. "You'll have to go through me first," she cried. The mob hesitated. No one in town would strike a widow. One by one, torches dropped into the mud. The men dispersed, their anger dissolving into shame. Elias looked at her, voice trembling. "Why'd you stand up for me?" She smiled. "Because I heard what you hear, Elias. Not voices, but the cry of something still good in this world." For weeks after the mob, Elias heard nothing. The shop was quiet, almost too quiet. No whispers, no warnings, no faint breath from the meat or the shadows. He told himself it was peace, but it felt more like abandonment. He spent his evenings by the river, watching the current drift past the stones. Once, he muttered, "Maybe they're gone for good." A soft bark answered him. A stray dog had followed him home, a small brown mutt with kind eyes. "Well, look at you," Elias smiled faintly. "Guess I'm not the only stray in this town." He shared a piece of bread with it and named it Whisper. And for the first time in years, the old butcher laughed, quietly, gently, as if afraid to disturb the peace. It happened in the middle of a calm afternoon. Elias was preparing a lamb for a customer when his hand suddenly froze mid-cut. The air thickened. His knife trembled. Then a whisper. This one fragile, pleading, almost human. "Not me. Her." Elias dropped the blade, heart pounding. "Who's her?" he asked aloud. But there was no answer. That night, thunder rolled over the Tennessee hills. Rain lashed the town like lashes from an unseen whip. Through the storm, Elias's mind kept repeating the words, not me, her, and then it hit him. Widow Hensley's cottage sat right on the riverbank. If the water rose, she'd be in danger. He grabbed his lantern and ran into the night. By the time he reached her cottage, the river was already swollen, black water crawling up the front steps. Mrs. Hensley, Elias shouted, slamming his shoulder into the door. You need to get out. The widow, frail but stubborn, was still trying to save her Bible and her cat. It's just a bit of water, she insisted. Not for long. Elias grabbed her hand and pulled her out just as the floorboards cracked and the wall gave way. Moments later, the whole cottage collapsed into the torrent, swept downstream like driftwood. Elias wrapped his coat around her shoulders as she trembled on the bank. How did you know? She asked through tears. He hesitated, then whispered, The lamb spoke. She didn't laugh. She simply took his hand and said, Then maybe God's still using you after all. A few days later, a carriage arrived at the butcher's shop. Out stepped Clara Boone, grown, graceful, her city dress soaked in travel dust. She hadn't seen her father in 10 years. Pa, she said softly when she entered the shop, I heard about what happened. The fire, the flood, even the bridge. Elias looked up from his work, eyes wet. You shouldn't have come. I had to, she said. Everyone calls you mad, but the man I remember wasn't mad. He just cared too much. He smiled faintly. That's what they fear most. Men who care too much. Clara stayed. She cooked for him, helped clean the shop, even greeted customers with a smile. And slowly, the town began to see Elias not as a monster, but as a man, quiet, scarred, but good. For the first time in a long while, he felt like a father again. That evening, Elias and Clara sat by the fire. She was telling him about the city, how loud, how bright, how empty it felt. He listened, smiling, then said, I think I'm ready to leave this place behind soon. Maybe come with you. She beamed. I'd like that, Pa. Later that night, as Elias was cleaning his knives for the last time, a soft sound filled the shop. He froze. The whisper had returned, calm, peaceful, and unlike the others. You've done enough, Elias. Rest now. Tears filled his eyes. Who are you? He asked, but he already knew. The voice was his brother's, the one who died at Shiloh, whose face had haunted him ever since. Elias smiled through his tears. Then it's time. He folded his apron neatly on the counter, blew out the lantern, and stepped into the night. The next morning, Clara awoke to find the shop door unlocked. The counter was clean, the tools polished. His apron was folded neatly beside a loaf of bread and a note. Don't grieve, my Clara. The river called me home. Listen, and you'll hear it too. Love, Pa. She ran to the riverbank. His boots were there, placed carefully side by side, the dog Whisper lying next to them, whimpering softly. No body was ever found, just a calm patch of water that seemed to shimmer with silver light. Clara wept, holding the dog in her arms. He's free, she whispered. He's finally free. Years passed, and Elias Boone became legend. Children grew up hearing stories of the butcher who listened to the dead. Some swore that if you stood by his old shop at midnight, you could hear faint murmurs, not cries of terror, but whispers of peace. Widow Hensley often told the tale by her fireplace. He wasn't mad, children. He just heard what we couldn't, the voice of mercy in all things living and gone. And when the river rose each spring, folks left flowers by the spot where his boots had been found. White lilies, for remembrance. Even Sheriff Mason, old and gray, was seen tipping his hat toward the water some evenings. Guess you weren't crazy after all, old friend, he'd mutter. In time, Clara reopened the butcher shop. But not for meat. She turned it into a small kitchen for the hungry, where travelers, widows, and children could eat for free. Above the door, she hung a hand-carved sign that read, "Respect all life, here before you harm." And just below that, carved faintly in her father's old handwriting, were the words, "The meat once spoke." Some thought it superstition, others said it was poetry. But those who knew Elias Boone, or who had once been saved by him, understood the truth. He had never heard death. He had only ever heard life, pleading to be seen. And in that quiet, sacred way, the butcher who spoke to the meat had taught his town to listen, not with their ears, but with their hearts.